photographs. This was originally installed in March of 2020 and never saw the light of day until today. So I want to thank you all, because this was a triumph that this exhibit, we were able to hold this exhibit over, work with Jorge Corralejo and the museum's Latino Advisory Committee to bring this to fruition. So it's my pleasure to introduce Ana Bermudez. She's our chief curator here at the museum, and I'd like her to talk a little bit about how this exhibit came together. So thank you, Ana.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. My name is Ana Bermudez, and I'm the chief curator here at the museum, and it was my pleasure, my honor to put this exhibit together along with everything else that you're seeing today. About 3 years ago, Jorge, 3 years ago, it's so long, probably longer with the pandemic. I skipped the pandemic year. We met with, I had a call from Rick Castañero and Julio Alcalá, who said, you've got to meet this man. He has all these photo albums full of photographs, and nobody's ever seen them. They all relate to the UFW. So I said, okay, bring it by the museum. We set up a meeting. We sat down in that little alcove in the back, and he took out all these magnetic photo albums, and I said, oh my God, Julio, you've got to get him to get these photographs out of these albums. They're going to ruin them. And it wasn't so much, I wasn't looking at the content as much as I was worried that we were going to lose a part of history. So luckily, with the we agreed to do an exhibit, and with the help of Ray Vargas and our Latino Advisory Committee, Maria Munguia, George Sandoval, we went and visited Jorge at his home. We went through hundreds of photographs. We brought the best ones back with us, and Jorge brought more. And we painstakingly took them out of these magnetic photo albums with dental floss, with business cards, with whatever we could without ruining the photographs. And we put together an exhibit that was only in this one room that you see here. On March 13th, the 13th, yeah, we closed the last case, 2020, and we went home. Nobody ever saw it. So this is it. Excuse me. This is it plus. We decided that if we're going to do this, we're going to go big or don't do this at all. So we did. We decided to increase our capacity here at the museum, fill 2 galleries with Jorge's photographs. We brought in some artists that were doing, there's so much art just UFW related. We wanted that to be a part of it as well. And it's just been a fantastic journey for us. We have something on Egg City, which is so near and dear to everybody's hearts in Ventura County. And I really thank Jorge for bringing all these photographs together and really teaching us more about UFW history and Dolores and Cesar. So thank you all for being here. And I encourage all of you to come back and visit the museum. We are free right now. Take your time going through the exhibits, because today there's so many people, you're probably reconnecting with people, but come back and look at it when you have more time on your own, because I think you're really going to enjoy it. So thank you to the man who did this for us, and without further ado, Jorge Corralejo.
Welcome everyone, bienvenidos, and I'm so excited to see you all here, so proud to see that you all here have an interest in Latino history. You know, this marks an incredible time in that for this museum, from this time they're making a transformation to be far more inclusive of all peoples, not just Latino, but all peoples in the history of the county and the region. So we're going to hold them accountable, and that is what it's about. And working with the staff, all of the staff, you know, Ellen, Anna, Denise, you know, Eric, Scott. They're an incredible group, and they're committed to being inclusive about all peoples in this museum. So that's an exciting future for the museum. Keep in mind that this museum is a nonprofit. They depend on members, and we're such a huge part of this community. Look at all the members, the potential members. So we're a part of the future of this institution. So moving forward with it, I'm going to start how this all developed. Back in, please come in, there's plenty of room. You're gonna squeeze tight, don't worry. You know, back in about 64, 65, when the Bracero program was over, Mexicans on short-term work program here in the United States ended, they returned to Mexico. So I was a sophomore in high school at that time, and the growers went to the school to see if they could get some students to work. So I thought to myself, work is work, jale es jale. So I went to work picking in the fields. So tough work, but I saw the immigrants working in the fields, and I witnessed firsthand the dehumanization of the immigrant workers. You know, the humiliation and the non-payment, the cheating on payment. I couldn't believe it. When I was a junior in high school, I worked at Egg City, the largest egg producer in the nation, and I saw more of the same there. So when I internalized these people, and when I saw the union go on a strike in Oxnard with the Mel Finnerman group here, I went to join and volunteer, and I did. And so I joined them on the strike lines in the offices, and I joined them in the fields on the strikes. The fortunate thing is I had a camera, so I was able to take some pictures. It was great for a historical record, not that I thought about that. However, it was great to keep the police from beating up the people that were on strike, which they did very commonly. So I stayed with it, and then you know, a lot of people didn't know about the union in those days. So organized, you can see some of the union members here, all the other unions to march downtown Oxnard to recognize the USW. So you see some of the unions in support marching down Oxnard Boulevard. And then Philip Veracruz was a good friend of mine. He's a Filipino board member of the United Farm Workers Union. You know, we're humble people, Latinos and Filipinos, but Philip was a real firestorm, a real intellect, and a real radical, but a real fiery guy. So I brought him to speak, wanted to be the keynote speaker at one of these rallies back in those days. And then Cesar came down here. We marched through La Colonia in Oxnard and down Oxnard Boulevard, had some rallies there. You see some of the pictures there as well. And then at a later point in time, you know, the workers at Egg City went on strike. So about half the workers went on strike, and another half stayed in there. So the union was strong, but they couldn't win with half the workers on strike. Now it turns out that a friend of my brother, a drinking brother and a buddy, was the only Mexican supervisor that Egg City ever had there, and he was keeping the other half of the workers. They were all Mexicanos in Egg City. So we talked to him about what was right and what was wrong. His name was Edward Luevano Flores. And we talked to him about right and wrong and these kinds of things, he and I, and convinced them to come out. We talked them out of it. They brought the rest of the workers out, and we knocked them dead at Egg City. Thanks to that, my brother and myself.
Texas a California, campesinos están luchando. Desde Texas a California, campesinos están luchando. Los rancheros de llore y llore, de huelga ya están bien pardos. El picket sign, lo lleva por todo el día. El picket sign, conmigo toda la vida. Ya tenemos más de 10 años peleando con esta huelga.
In the back, you'll see some pictures of Cesar walking through Moore Park with Eliseo Medina, another board member, walking through the streets of Moore Park. Now, my family was the only Pochos that joined the strike with the campesinos, the Big City workers. Back in the corner, you see my sister and my nieces and brother walking down the streets of Moore Park with the strikers. I'm so proud of them. I'm glad that they came today. So life went on. I got to know Cesar Chavez very, very well. One of the things when Egg City came out, he says, can you get a copy of the Teamster contract? Because the Teamsters signed a sweetheart deal with Egg City. So basically it's a sweetheart deal, nothing for the workers and keep the union out. So I talked to Ed, when he comes, could he bring a copy of the Teamster contract, sweetheart? And he did. So I got the contract, I gave it to Cesar, we knocked them dead. And contract, and they did contract. So, a lot of stories behind this. At the same time, you know, up in Delano, on the far corner, you see Agbayani Village. About 1970, 71, there were a lot of Filipinos that came over in the 1930s. You know, hardworking, and they were old. A few of them married Mexicans, but most of them were too poor, made no money. They had no place to go. The growers threw them out. They were too old to work. What were they going to do? Cesar said they're going to die with dignity and respect. So he gave them some land on the union headquarters in Delano on 40 acres, right next to the clinic. We built we had the materials by volunteer labor. Volunteers built a really nice, large senior citizen complex there, where they lived with dignity and respect the rest of their lives. So that was a great venture, and you know, Philip Veracruz was there overseeing that as well. Pete Velasco as well, another Filipino, a board member as well. So there's some interesting pictures. I see some old student activists here from the late 60s and 70s. Libristas, probably the most progressive Chicano activist group, but some of them are building the Agbayani village. And then I see some old professors from the old days that helped start La Raza studies back in those days, you know, Dr. Ley Ibarra from Fresno State University, Tomas Almaguer from San Francisco State and Cal. Mario Barrera was going to be here. He's older than us, the author, read his books, but he's very ill. He's retired, very ill. He called me, he said that he's not going to be able to make it, but that's okay. I spoke with Rudy Acuna, who wanted to come, but he's got Parkinson's. He can speak okay, but he can't move. But he congratulated us on all being here. And then we have, you know, some of the more recent La Raza studies group like Frank Barajas and Jose Alamillo and some others that are here today from Cal State University, Channel Islands. So the struggle continues. And then I see some people that came, some old campesinos or strikers coming down from Delano today and from a lot of different places. My goodness. So we got a good mix of folks, you know, so I stayed in touch, really involved with Cesar, and then I went back east. I moved back east to go to graduate school. I published a newspaper for 3 years, Salsi Puedas, a bilingual newspaper. And then I went back east to graduate school, where I was involved with the boycott, a boycott of A&P markets. They were the largest scab sellers of produce in the United States. So I organized students, and on the weekends we picketed every week in the rain and the snow, and ultimately we brought them down. But Cesar would come to town. We had huge marches down Boston. Dolores Huerta would come to town, speak. We'd end up at the A&P headquarters to strike. And this was continual activity all over the country, but A&P was big, especially on the East Coast. And we ultimately knocked them down. And once A&P fell, the largest, all the other stores fell right behind them. The union never had as many contracts until that time. So that was tremendous victory. So we did that. After that, I took my first job out of graduate school. I was teaching at Cal State University, Fresno. I continued to work with the union, with Cesar. And the university would not permit Cesar Chavez to come. The student body wanted to use their funds to bring him in for free speech. They said, not a chance, the growers. So I was elected vice president of United Professors of California, AFL-CIO. So we brought Cesar into town, and it was really controversial, tense situation. And he spoke, and it was an incredible speech. He spoke with all of the anti-Cesar. He talked to these, anti-Cesar people, the students, and said, if you want, I'll answer any questions that you got, not to worry. He diffused the situation, and he came in and gave a hell of a speech. Nevertheless, it was very tense, almost fights broke out. So I got students interested in the union. He saw a picture over there with Philip Veracruz on Agbayani Village. Some of my students working there with the union. I taught a course on land use in the Central Valley and things such as this to reinforce, because a lot of the students were agricultural workers at Cal State University of Fresno. So, you know, we actively engaged against Proposition 14 and these kinds of things. And then after that, I left and I went to Washington, D.C., where I worked in political advocacy. I learned how to work the Hill very well. Cesar would come and visit with me in Washington, D.C., and stay with me and ask me about policy issues with regards to rural areas, farm workers, and the likes. So we had developed a really strong unity amongst us, and in touch. I had given the museum some letters from Cesar documenting some of our interchanges and things such as that. So there are a lot more pictures and letters and things such as that they have, but this is a small museum, so very limited space. Nevertheless, so that is how I continued to work on rural issues, on national perspectives there. And then coming back, you know, I continued to work, knowing how to use policy. I continued to work the rest of my life on policy issues in Washington, D.C. and national issues, impacting mostly working class America, Main Street America, campesinos, other minorities, handicapped veterans and so forth, women, those kinds of things. I did that the rest of my life. So anyway, it's the farm worker passion that drove me to do these kinds of things. And so now recently, you know that here the campesinos still have a hard time with the pesticides, working conditions and so forth. And you know, the Supreme Court just passed an anti-farm worker movement to eliminate organizers from meeting with the workers before work or after work, so make it harder for unions. But there's still a lot of work. But about 3 years ago, I introduced some of the Mixteco Purepecha workers with Teresa Romero, the new president, relatively new president of the United Farm Workers Union, to look at developing a plan for the better treatment of farm workers long term after the exit of Donald Trump, of course. So there's a communication that will be built there. And I see some members of the Mixteco community here. I want to welcome there. You know, Ventura County has a huge number of farm workers, immigrants. The majority of them are Mixteco, but they're also Purepecha, they're also Zapotecas, Tirques, and Mayas. Many of them from Oaxaca and Yucatan, Guerrero, but a few other places as well. So there's a lot of work more to be done here, not just with the workers, but with the museum and these kinds of things. And last of all, I just want to thank you all for being here, appreciating this, and pushing for these kinds of things, because you're voting here today by your presence. You're telling the museum, this is our history, these are our leaders, this is who we are, and we're very much a part of this county, a part of the history of here. And now, if you look at LACMA had an exhibit 3 years ago in downtown Los Angeles on the tree. They found some tunnels way beneath Teotihuacan that showed an enormous civilization that traded from deep down in Central America, throughout Mexico, and throughout the southwestern United States. They have all of these artifacts. So now you have all these indigenous folks coming from Mexico. That trade continues, the cultural exchange continues, and so it's exciting. It's an exciting piece of history. So it's real. It's in the continent. So it's for us to push to vote. In spite of voter segregation, we need to vote at the ballot, but also vote with this institution and all institutions that we're very much a part of here. We belong here. And the best to all of you. Welcome. I hope to get a chance to speak a moment with each of you. Thank you so very much. Yeah.
Well, I started as a very young man. After the Bracero program closed in 1964-65, I was a sophomore in school, and so the growers were looking for workers, so they tried to recruit some students. So work is work, so I went to work. And but I saw the abuse, I was working with it. They would also hire immigrants and mistreated them, abused them, didn't pay them. So, and then I also worked at Lake City at the time, and the same kind of abuse. So when the union went on strike around 1969 with Mel Finnerman here, I went as a volunteer and joined the picket lines and as a volunteer. Fortunately, I had a camera, so I was able to record some historical record. It also assisted to keep the police from beating up our people as well. So it started there, and I got involved with the union and with Cesar Chavez, got to know him very well, Dolores Huerta, and stayed with the union many years. Published a newspaper in the 70s in college, marched in the marchas, continued with the strikes, the boycott against Safeway, went to graduate school on the East Coast, continued with the boycott against A&P, the largest sellers of scam produce in the nation. So on the weekends, our organized students, we picketed A&P, and Cesar would come to town. We marched through Boston, Dolores too. There's some photos here, marking these points, and we beat A&P. Once they fell, all the other stores fell, and we got more union contracts than ever during that time. So that's a short summary. It goes on. I went to work after that at Cal State University, Fresno, continued to work with Cesar and the union, got my students involved there, brought them to speak there, even though the growers didn't want them there at the time, the administration didn't want them. I was elected as the vice president of the United Professors of California. So we brought Cesar, and a really tense situation there in Fresno, and then I went to there. I went to Washington, D.C. and worked on advocacy, national advocacy issues. Stayed in touch with Cesar. He would visit with me to discuss policy issues there in Washington, D.C. So we stayed in touch, and I'd come back and forth in the summers, helped on the strikes with Lake City and wherever I could assist them, and played a key role with my family, assisting them with Lake City to beat them. Got a copy of the Teamsters sweetheart contract, gave it to him, and we beat him down as well.
How did you feel during that time, as a person involved in this? Was there any sense of fear, or did you feel that you were involved in something that was unique and special?
Well, I just felt it was it. I just felt the passion. I saw the abuse of people, the human violations of people. As a young man, it was just a natural thing for me to do, and I just felt it was so important, and it's been important my whole life because I've done these kinds of things. Even active today at almost 72, still active as much as my mind lets me be. So I did advocacy. I published a lot of editorials. It was always with inclusive of minorities, inclusive of workers. So I did it a lifetime. So it's been a part of who I am.
What do you think was everlasting impact of the movement of the farm workers movement to workers today?
It's important, when I speak with a lot of the campesinos today, the Mixtecos and Oxnard, Cesar is the heaver. So that's good. They're excited about this exhibit, to be coming to this. They don't visit museums often or ever at all. But they're going to plan to come here. I'm doing an interview with their radio program in the next several days. County of Ventura is doing Pacific Service announcements. This exhibit continues until October 3rd, every day except for Mondays. And so people are excited about the County of Ventura. I'm going to do an interview there with the major talk hosts. So it's so important to people today. It's not dissipated. The Mixtecos, Zapotecos, Tirques here, Purapechas, and Fillmore, Santa Paula, and even some Mayas in Newberry Park and Thousand Oaks. So las indígenas is still very important. He's a hero. He's
Workers from Delano. Yay! 1965.
Richard Jimenez here.
some growers that support the museum objected to this exhibit, so they threatened to withdraw their money. They do not want us to have heroes. They do not want us to demonstrate Latino-Mexican history here. Though we go back, indigenous peoples go back thousands of years in this context. The answer is no. We threatened to withdraw the money, and money dictates what occurs. But fortunately, this time around, with this administration of the museum, we're moving forward, and that's why, in a sense, we're voting by showing up today. We're voting saying, yes, we recognize our history, we recognize our leaders and our movements, and they're important to us. It's the history of the Southwest, the history of Ventura County and Southern California. So we're voting by people showing up here today. We're voting, and that's good. It's important to vote on ballot time, but this is another means of voting. To me, is that Latinos, I had never seen Latinos being organized. I was a high school student, but you saw nothing about Latinos in history ever. We were totally excluded. But to see Latinos organized and on strike, that's the closest you come to something of record. So I felt the humane part of it to be there. And I took my camera. As it turns out, it was a good idea because it kept police from beating up on our people. But it also recorded historical record. I'm so glad that I did, because people find use in this. I didn't know that what I was going to do with these things till the museum had called me and asked me if I had any people had heard about me and if I had any archives. And I certainly did. I certainly did. Yes, I did.
Okay.
And so my passion was there. You can probably see I'm surprised at myself that I got some really interesting pictures to see the body and soul of the workers of this guy writing Espacio y Justicia. You see the faces, you see the hard work and the struggle of the people. That was not difficult to capture because it was so prevalent. But it's been my passion for those times and for my lifetime. In talking with the leadership, they are thinking about transforming the museum to be more inclusive. And they know they've not been inclusive. When you have growers threatening to withdraw their money, you can understand why. Yeah. But they made a commitment, the director and all the staff have made a commitment to be more inclusive. So one of the things that I recently suggested to them now, that this will be on and over in October, how about doing something with the indigenous peoples here? Not just the Chumashan, starting with the Chumashan, which they've done a small measure, but all the indigenous peoples from Mexico that they've heard, Mixtecas, Zapotecas, Tirques, Purapechas, Mayas, and some others. And over 2,000 years ago, Teotihuacan, they discovered about in the last 10 years some tunnels under Teotihuacan where they found the extent of the enormity of the civilization and the trade from deep in Central America into the southwestern United States. And so this is a continuation of that, the change of culture, exchange of culture and languages. Almost all of them still speak their indigenous pre-Columbian language from thousands of years ago. This is an important part of our history. So this is one thing that I'm proposing to them, that we get organized. And it's part of our history. There's so much of our community here in Ventura County that's indigenous, and in Santa Barbara as well, certainly in LA. And so, but here in Ventura County, the population is so significant. Let's do something along that. They need recognition. They want to feel accepted and recognized in this county for who they are, what they do, and their contributions to hard work and to the economy.
Do you have plans for archiving your body of work?
I don't know yet. I'm still thinking it over. I don't know if the museum has the funds to keep it or to use it anymore. University of California, Santa Barbara asked me about it. I think the Autry Museum has some interest in it. We'll see. After all is settled and done, I'll make a decision at a later point in time. It's important because for people my age, you see a lot of things that you remember from the strikes, the boycotts, the marches. Cesar and Dolores, of course, and other leaders, Philip Veracruz and others. I give them much more material than you see today. They're sitting on a great deal more. And nevertheless, is good because you'll see people that you know from the good old days, and for young people, it inspires them to show leadership and movement. And we need their leadership. We need the youth leadership. So by all means, come and give the museum recognition for doing this and for continuing their inclusionary process.
Beautiful.
Campesino, campesino, campesino mexicano, qué bonitas tierras siembras, lástima que sean del amor.